Editorial note. I am sure, at this juncture, that many of my fellow Inquisitors would have seen no point in continuing this experiment at any further than it had. The knowledge that chaos had a solid foothold on the planet would have been enough for some to merely dismiss the planet as dead and declare an immediate exterminatus. Indeed, the temptation to do so was there, but I stayed my hand for two reasons. The first, based on practicality. We had no way of knowing the extent of the enemy's hold, and we also weren't sure at the time what their goals were. It's often easy to forget, when dealing with chaos, that the great enemy always acts with some hidden motive in mind, save for perhaps the Warriors of Khorne, who seem to fight for bloodshed and nothing more, although my fellows of the Ordo Malleus and Hereticus would likely be more knowledgeable on this than myself. It was highly possible that the Chaos Cult on this planet could provide clues to the actions and motives of the Chaos Gods in this sector of the galaxy. The second reason was, admittedly, of a selfish nature. The people here had grown to impress me. I was astounded by their capabilities and their strength of arms and character. Though primitive to us, the Heathmore people had stood stalwart against an orc invasion, primitive though it was, and I confess myself curious as to how they would deal with a chaos cult. However, I was still no fool. Knowing full well that nothing is ever certain when it comes to the great enemy, I wasn't prepared to risk the consequences of a full chaos incursion. If necessary, I would call in a division of Black Templars to purge the cult, or possibly order a virus bombing of the planet. I also found myself completely fascinated by the young woman that I'd taken under my wing from the Blue Dragon himself, Zhu Ying. Before returning to the matter of Heathmore and what was going on planetside, as there is much to discuss, I wanted to take a minute to share what I found out in her regard when I brought her aboard the ship that I had commandeered, the Light of Glory, and while it may seem less than conventional to do so, I'll use my own data log to share on this account. From Inquisitorial Log 438, aboard the Light of Glory. The ride from the planet back to the ship had been very entertaining. Watching the poor Zhu Ying panicking and cringing at every sound the troop shuttle made on its way out of the atmosphere was quite amusing. I was fiercely reminded just how primitive the society was, that this girl was now wincing and cowering in the face of something as mundane as surface-to-atmosphere transport. The sight of my craft alone had caught her eye with wonder, but riding it had instilled her with a fear of it. But once we've landed in the ship hangar, portside, getting her off became a matter of convincing. She was scared, and she couldn't be blamed for it. She didn't know where I'd taken her, or why. I tried to convince her I wouldn't hurt her, but she was suspicious, and there were a few moments when she'd scream that I felt sick to my stomach, and I suspect it had nothing to do with my nerves. If my suspicions were right, Zhu Ying was very special indeed. I finally managed to get her off of the loading ramp, and upon seeing where she was, she sank to her knees in horror and disbelief. She couldn't have been more than 17 years old, and yet I felt like I was going to support a toddler who had lost her parents. Taking her arm carefully, I escorted her through the hangar as her eyes darted to the troop ships, the carriers, the vehicles, and the massive size of the space itself. Her knees shook often, and she yelped at any sound, especially whenever the captain said anything over the ship's vox. She covered her ears fast and would scream about the voice. The amusement was still there, but so was my sympathy. I was beginning to wonder if it wouldn't have been easier just to do what I had to on the planet, but I dismissed those worries. What's done was done, and regrets waste both time and energy. After a few minutes of careful wording and patience, I was finally able to get her to walk with me and talk.
What is this place?
She asked for perhaps the 5th time. It's a spacecraft, the Light of Glory, I explained again to her. Think of it like a boat that we use to travel from world to world across the sea of stars.
This is not a boat.
Zhu Ying criticized.
I have been in boats before, and this is gigantic. Closed off.
It's the only example I can offer to make you understand, I shrugged.
Do you intend to take me across the stars?
Zhu Ying asked. Not yet, I answered honestly. There's something I want your help with first. I walked her out of the hangar bay and down a long corridor. Every individual we passed tensed up or saluted me as I walked by. There was no reason to salute, of course, but it was a nervous reaction to seeing an Inquisitor. Zhu Ying marveled at their clothes and the glowing lanterns above us. She tapped her fingers along the solid metal walls and floors as if she couldn't believe she was surrounded by the material.
Is your ship all made of steel?
She asked. I knew trying to explain it in true detail would confuse her, so I nodded. Yes, it is.
What manner of blacksmith could forge such a thing?
The Adeptus Mechanicus, I answered without thinking.
What are those?
You'll see them soon enough. The sight of the Magos on ship was nothing short of delightful for me, as it gave me the chance to see Shu Ying's response. The Magos Daria was a woman who had replaced perhaps half of her body with machine parts. Her mouth was replaced by a triangular disc that spoke and breathed for her. Both of her eyes were glowing ovular replacements, and her entire right arm was an augmentic limb. 3 machine tendrils were moving about under her robes, working their way to different lecterns and runes so that, while talking to me, she could focus her energy on the ship's running. Shu Ying nearly fainted at the sight of her. "Inquisitor," Magos Daria said in her machine-style drone voice, though I heard the hint of pleasure in her tone. "A pleasure to have you back." "Not for long, Daria," I answered, working to support and calm Shu Ying.
Well, why does her skin resemble that of a bug?
She squeaked. "I beg your pardon?" Daria asked. "She's, new." I stifled a chuckle. "Meet Zhu Ying. Zhu Ying, this is Daria. She's a mechanicus, like I told you. She, is like a shipwright for this boat." "A boat?" Daria inflected, enough unhappiness in her voice to show that she didn't like her ship being called a boat. Her outburst elicited a chuckle from the other folks on the command bridge. The captain, a large man with broad shoulders and graying hair with signs of fatigue and lack of sleep under his eyelids, sighed. "Daria, if you wouldn't mind not shouting, I have a headache," Captain Killian muttered. "And Inquisitor, is there a reason you brought a child on board?" Most wouldn't casually question anything an Inquisitor did, but Killian and I had history, and I'd commandeered his vessel on a few occasions. He knew me, and we had a strong enough rapport that we could be more casual. "All in good time, Captain," I answered. "Is Anders awake? I need to see him." Anders was an associate of mine who accompanied me on a few of my missions. I had made the choice to bring him along on this mission to Heathmore, though I doubted I would have any need for his skills. He was a psyker, and a damned good one too, though his methods of speech were sometimes off-putting. He was bald, save for a small degree of stubble on his chin. He looked young, perhaps in his 20s or 30s, though he himself wasn't entirely sure of the date of his birth himself. The captain explained that he was awake and currently taking up space in the mess hall. I turned to Shu Ying and smiled. "Dear, would you be so kind as to come with me?" Needless to say, I did find Anders eventually, but the process by which I obtained his help need not concern us. Instead, I'd like to push ahead to what he discovered. I waited outside the conference room quietly. I didn't know why Anders insisted on speaking with Zhu Ying alone, but I figured it was something to do with his particular qualities. After about 40 minutes had passed, Anders finally emerged from the conference room and closed the door behind him quietly, holding a finger to his lips to encourage silence. "She's asleep," he answered. After all the excitement, I suppose she probably needed it. "Well?" I asked. Anders shrugged. "I don't know what you expect me to say," he answered curtly. I rolled my eyes. "Did you analyze her? Did you give her a full mental workup?" I pushed. Anders nodded his head. "Oh, yes. I probed her mind. Her mental barriers are quite exceptional." I blinked at that. "So what does that mean?" I demanded. "She's gifted at dissemination," Anders replied. "But then again, so are many disciplined men and women I've met." "Damn it, why must you always talk around the point?" I growled. "Why must you never ask what you mean?" he countered. And I groaned. This was why Anders could be infuriating. He was remarkably blunt and direct in everything he said. He always gave straight answers that were direct in response to whatever was asked, but never gave up information that wasn't asked for. He wanted me to ask him what I really wanted to know, so I groaned and relented. "Is she a psyker?" I demanded. Anders waited a moment, closed his eyes, and then nodded. "Oh, yes. She has a connection to the warp." I smirked at the news. "She clearly hasn't gone through any training, but she already possesses some clear indicators of the gifts." "Like what?" "She can sense the presence of oddities in the warp. Her memories told me that she has been able to sense dangers of supernatural origin, usually of the warp. I also believe, and I cannot be certain, but she might be capable of warpcraft herself." "And your evidence of this is?" I asked. "She claims there were times in her youth where learning to be whatever she calls herself, a Sanhu. She claims during her pyrotechnic training, there were times she produced fire not originating from a flint. It's highly possible it was done through warpcraft." "Is it possible to perform warpcraft without training?" "It is. though to refine it and use it safely would require more discipline and training than what she has. I sighed and leaned against the wall of the corridor. Well, what do you recommend, then? It's not my place to direct an Inquisitor. Well, pretend I'm not an Inquisitor. What would you think is best for her? I would say that you need to get her a tutor. Her potential is there, but if your reports are true and heretics have a foothold on the planet, then a rogue psyker is the last liability we need, Anders answered me. There's every possibility they will seek her out for her abilities. Suddenly a thought occurred to me as he spoke, a thought that grew into a crazy idea. Anders, is it possible for the heretics to sense other psykers? No, but a demon might, Anders replied. You said she was able to sense some kind of problem or danger in the past. It was this sense that led her to the cult village, I pressed. Then it's possible she felt the presence of a demon, Anders explained. I blinked and thought about the implications of that. Demon summoning? But to what end? They haven't made any open moves as of yet, and demon summoning requires sacrifices. If the servants of chaos are so brazen as to actually summon demons to the material world, then surely they'd think themselves strong enough to start acting openly, correct? Or they feel pressured, Anders offered. Summoning demons requires a lot of sacrifice and time. It's not something to be done lightly. Perhaps the rising of the orcs caused them to feel enough pressure to move their plans forward quicker than they intended. Well, it was a good point, and one that I felt was highly likely. The heretics didn't anticipate orcs, and their arrival pushed their plans forward. Their rush led them to be sloppy, and they summoned a demon without properly controlling it, and it destroyed everything in the village. The demon's power gave Xu Ying's attention, and that's how the Blue Dragons discovered them. Well, so now what? What will they do now that their plans are failing? I don't think they are, Anders answered. I looked at him expectantly, but he didn't say anything. Well, elaborate, I snapped. Consider the nature of chaos. What did they always strive for? Subjugation, I answered. They seek to destroy, maim, and corrupt in the name of their dark gods. But what is the method? Anders asked. It's always the same. Anarchy, civil unrest, open hostilities, and the attempted destruction of power. Yes, and the greenskins provided that quite nicely. Suddenly the coin dropped. I fully understood what he was implying. Chaos wasn't worried about the orcs, they were using them. With the greenskin invasion, there was now complete breakdowns in the factions and leadership. Valkenheim had managed to rally together thanks to Jarl Reynald's sacrifice, but the samurai were divided and uncoordinated, with some siding with the Emperor and Tomoe, while others were attempting to find their own path or leadership. And as for the knights, the legions were not all working with each other. Their leadership was faulty, and the Iron Legion seemed to hold animosity with Knight Warden William's Noble Legion, likely out of jealousy for his rapid rise in prominence, if I had to guess. Heathmoor was completely divided now more than ever, and it was the perfect breeding ground for chaotic activity. Emperor's guts! You mean... If I was a heretic, Anders answered, I couldn't have asked for a better playground to cause my mayhem.